There are files of creation humanity was never meant to open, ancient records too dreadful for common memory. Not every creature God spoke into existence was revealed to the world. Some were sealed away, not by chance, but by divine command. The forbidden whispers begin with one unsettling truth: beings walked the early earth who were neither angel nor demon. They existed in a category that defied comprehension, creatures whose presence unsettled even the spiritual order. Their very design was a riddle. Fragments of scripture once spoke of them, texts scattered in ruins and burned scrolls. Priests and forgotten temples hinted at their existence with trembling voices. People feared even to carve their shapes, as though memory itself could summon them back. The silence of heaven is no accident. God cloaked these creatures in obscurity, allowing mankind only glimpses and shadows. If their names had remained, men would have clung to them in dread, or sought to worship them in rebellion. The prophets wrote with caution, disguising warnings in song and metaphor. To the casual reader, nothing seemed unusual, yet to the discerning, the message was chilling. Each line was a locked door, guarding forbidden's truth. Why were they neither angels nor demons? Angels radiate light, demons exude darkness. Yet these creatures belonged to another order entirely. They were not messengers nor tempters, but entities standing at the edges of creation itself. They were paradoxes, both beautiful and terrifying, majestic yet destructive. They could not be tamed by worship nor driven by prayer. They were not holy nor fallen. They simply existed. Ancient warnings described them as shadows before the dawn, beings who walked between realms as though creation were a curtain. They served no throne, bowed to no king, and answered to no command. These were not myths spun by frightened men. They were encounters written in blood, villages erased, deserts whispering their names, seas raging in memory of their passage. Their presence scarred history itself. Some accounts called them guardians of mysteries too vast for humanity. Others said they were remnants of a first creation, echoes remaining after God reshaped the earth. Their existence proved that not everything made in the beginning was meant to endure. Even demons dread them. Angels shine with purpose, demons reek of rebellion, but these creatures carried authority outside both camps. They were wild storms that neither heaven nor hell could command. The silence around them was mercy. To speak of them gave them breath and memory gave them strength. Heaven decreed their names vanish, their images erased, their essence locked away. Still, fragments remain: apocryphal scrolls, cryptic poems, whispers and secret traditions. Those who stumbled upon them realized at once why they were forbidden. To know too much was to invite terror into the soul. Imagine a gaze impossible to endure, not monstrous but overwhelming in its strangeness. Imagine a cry neither roar nor song but something between, piercing not the ear but the spirit. These were realities, locked away from history. The ancients spoke of seas that boiled when they stirred, skies darkening without storm, and earth itself trembling beneath them. They were not nature, yet nature bent under their weight. Their arrival marked a disruption creation could not bear. Why then were they created? The question lingers like a shadow. Perhaps they were tests of obedience, reminders of boundaries too sacred to cross. Perhaps warnings of what lies beyond the veil of the known. The heavens are not empty nor simple. Beyond armies of angels and the abyss of demons lies a realm of beings that defy classification. They are threads of creation's tapestry, yet severed from man's story by God's silence. Even so, echoes remain. Myths of dragons, leviathans, serpents, and beings of shadow are not coincidences. They are cultural fragments of what once walked the earth, echoes of the forbiddens, half remembered by mankind. Their nature makes them more terrifying than demons. Demons seek destruction, angels bring order, but these creatures simply are untouchable, uncontrollable, unstoppable. Their will is unknown, their existence undeniable. To uncover their story is to walk a razor's edge between revelation and ruin. Heaven's silence is not neglect but protection. Humanity, however, has always hungered for what lies behind the veil. So whispers persist, tucked in caves, etched on tablets, scattered across cultures like broken shards. When pieced together, they reveal glimpses of beings too vast for the human mind. Even fragments inspire dread. The forgotten files of creation are deliberate omissions. God chose what humanity must remember and what must vanish. What was erased was not irrelevant, it was dangerous beyond imagining. Remember and what must vanish. What was erased was not irrelevant, it was dangerous. These creatures stood outside heaven's war. They did not rebel, yet they did not serve. They were anomalies, and that alone was enough to disrupt creation's balance. From silence emerges one truth: God hides what man cannot bear. Erasing their names preserved the sanity of nations and guarded generations from terrors they could not withstand. Yet questions linger like smoke after fire. If God hid them, where are they now? Were they destroyed or merely confined, waiting for the appointed hour to rise again? The hidden files are not just about what was lost, they hint at what may return. Should that day come, mankind would face a terror unlike anything known before. Somewhere in the folds of creation, their presence lingers still. Heaven is silent, earth forgets, but shadows remember. And in that remembrance lies the chilling truth of the forbiddance. What was hidden for a reason. Yet reasons have a way of breaking through silence, dragging horrors back into the light. And so the hidden files of creation remain locked, trembling at the edge of revelation. For once silence is broken, mankind may discover that the most terrifying creatures are not demons nor angels, but something far older, far stranger, and far more forbidden. The earth was not always as we know it. Before the fall of man, before the first sin-cracked creation, whispers tell of a world already haunted by shadows. It was filled with beings that belonged to another design altogether. These pre-Adamic whispers are seldom spoken in sacred halls. They are not tales to comfort the soul, but stories that disturb it. In that forgotten age, the earth bore inhabitants neither animal nor angel, neither holy nor damned, yet undeniably real. The ground itself holds their memory, as though rocks and rivers echo their passage. Ancient tribes refused to draw their likeness, fearing even depiction would summon them. Their footsteps left not just marks, but scars on creation's harmony. One of the few voices daring enough to speak was Enoch. His writings, glimpses of which survive in fragments, describe visions so haunting that later generations deemed them forbidden. What he saw was not simply heaven and hell, but something in between, an order of beings too strange to name. Enoch wrote of scrolls filled with warnings, accounts of creatures whose power rivaled storms and whose eyes gleamed with unnatural light. Much of his record was erased from the sacred canon. It was not ignorance that buried them. It was divine silence meant to protect mankind. The erased scrolls haunt the imagination. What knowledge was considered too heavy for humans to bear? If angels could be described, if demons could be named, why were these beings silenced? What terror lay in their remembrance? Among these mysteries were the Watchers, beings mentioned briefly, yet cloaked in secrecy. They were not angels as messengers, nor demons chained to rebellion. They were something else, assigned to oversee, yet corrupted by the world they observed. The Watchers strayed beyond their design, blending heavenly with earthly in ways never intended. From them came hybrid guardians, creatures towering, strange, fearsome, half spirit and half flesh. These were not myths, but entities that roamed the earth with unnatural authority. The hybrids were not gentle. They devoured, conquered, and dominated, twisting creation's balance. To man, they seemed like gods, but their hunger betrayed them. They were tyrants of flesh and shadow, abominations born of rebellion and mystery. Enoch described them as giants that swallowed the land's harvest and drank rivers dry. They were not satisfied with nature's bounty. They turned upon mankind, consuming those they were meant to shepherd. The world groaned beneath their violence. Civilizations trembled before their might. Kings fell, not in battle, but beneath the weight of these hybrid beings. They were more than conquerors. They were plagues walking in human form. It is here that the flood begins to make terrifying sense. Noah's days were not plagued merely by human sin. The world was drowning in corruption, both spiritual and genetic, a contamination threatening the very line of humanity. God looked upon the earth and saw not only wicked men but monstrous unions that mocked his creation. The flood was not punishment alone. It was a cleansing fire made of water. It was the hand of God erasing what could not be redeemed. Those abominations, born of watchers and flesh, could not inherit eternity. They were neither of heaven nor earth, suspended in judgment. The flood was their undoing, chains forged in waters that swallowed them whole. Even drowning could not silence their memory. Ancient cultures, separated by oceans and time, still told tales of giants, titans, and strange gods who once walked among men. Different names, different forms, yet the same shadows lingered. Some said these hybrid guardians became restless spirits, wandering without bodies. Others claimed they sank into the abyss, chained until a future day of reckoning. Either way, they were not gone, only displaced. The watchers themselves were bound, locked in darkness unseen by mortal eyes. Their rebellion had altered creation, and their punishment matched their crime. They are not free, but their story remains a warning to generations. Imagine humanity living under the constant gaze of creatures taller than towers, with strength beyond armies. Imagine knowing a child might be taken, not by disease or famine, but by beings too powerful to resist. This was the terror of Noah's world. When the floodwaters rose, it was not merely the end of a wicked generation. It was the silencing of something older, stranger, and far more dangerous. Humanity was spared not because it deserved mercy, but because God refused to let creation be consumed entirely. The ark became more than salvation. It was preservation. Within its walls was the seed of pure humanity, untainted by the corruption of watchers and hybrids. God refused to allow his image to be erased from the earth. Still, shadows whisper. Some believe fragments of those creatures survived, hidden in caves, deep oceans, or untouched deserts. Myths of leviathans, cyclopes, and towering hunters may not be imagination, but remnants of forbidden history. The terror lies not only in what was destroyed, but in what may linger unseen. If even a trace of their bloodline remained, what would prevent their return in some dreadful form? The thought chills every generation. Enoch's warnings speak not only of the past, but of the future. He foresaw a day when the Watcher's offspring would rise again, not in flesh perhaps, but in influence, shaping nations and corrupting hearts. The shadows before the flood might cast themselves again. The flood was a pause, not a final end. It was God's great reset, a cleansing that allowed humanity to continue. But the memory of what came before has not been fully erased, only buried beneath layers of silence and time. The forbidden creatures remind us that evil is not always simple rebellion. Sometimes it is distortion, a twisting of what was meant to be pure. That distortion remains humanity's greatest threat. Noah's story becomes more than survival. It becomes testimony that God wages war, not only against human sin, but against hidden abominations that seek to overtake creation. It was divine protection on a scale too vast to measure. Even now, traces of those days ripple across history. Myths and legends are humanity's way of remembering without knowing. Stories of gods, giants, and monsters are shadows of truths too frightening to accept. The shadows before the flood are not simply history. They are warnings of what lies in the unseen, reminders that creation once harbored terrors humanity was never meant to face. They remain as whispers locked away, waiting for the final chapter of time. And so we return to the silence of God, a silence that is mercy. For if all were revealed, the weight would crush us. Yet in the fragments we hold, the message is clear. Noah's flood was never just against man, but against creatures the world was never meant to remember. The veil of silence trembles when the 12 creatures of terror are unveiled. They were never meant for mortal eyes, yet their memory survived in whispers, myths, and fragments of forbidden scripture. Not demons, not angels, something older, hidden in the cracks of existence. The first was Ravan, the beast of endless hunger. It devoured not for survival, but for compulsion, consuming flesh and spirit alike. Nations remembered it as a dragon, but its true form was a maw that nothing could satisfy. The second was Seraphis, a being of burning flame. Unlike angels of fire who served the throne, Seraphis burned without purpose, setting creation itself ablaze. Forests vanished, rivers boiled, and mountains blistered at its presence. The third was Umbriel, a shadow without body. It stretched across the land, swallowing light and drowning villages in blindness. Even demons feared it, for its darkness suffocated their rebellion. The fourth was Thalaran, lord of the deep seas. Sailors told of its movements stirring tsunamis that swallowed coastlines. Its scales shimmered with unnatural light, and its roar silenced storms themselves. The fifth was Goliathus, a giant of stone and earth. Unlike men, it bore no soul, yet its intelligence mocked humanity. Its steps carved valleys, and its fists split mountains. The sixth was Nyxara, cloaked in illusions. To see it was to lose one's mind, for it twisted reality into dreams and nightmares indistinguishable from truth. Whole tribes vanished following visions it planted before them. The seventh was Ophidian, the serpent that was neither beast nor spirit. Its coils stretched for miles, and its hiss carried words that ensnared the heart. Legends of world serpents echo its terror, but none match the dread of its cunning speech. The eighth was Marith, the winged terror that eclipsed the sky. Unlike angels whose wings carried messages, Marith's wings carried storms of decay. To see it fly was to watch daylight drown in crimson shadow. The ninth was Ilarion, half-beast, half-spirit, commander of the wild. It bent animals into armies that moved as one monstrous soul. Forests became war camps under its dominion. The 10th was Avrith, a parasite of flesh and spirit. It entered bodies and twisted them into abominations. Whole families, once pure, became monsters unrecognizable even to themselves. The 11th was Kael'th, a being of sound and vibration. Its cries shattered walls, splintered bone, and tore the earth. In its hands, music became a weapon of ruin. The 12th and most terrifying was Abith, the nameless void. Unlike the others, it had no describable form. It was a hole in creation itself, a wound where light and matter vanished into silence. Each of these creatures carried not only power, but terror meant to unravel human understanding. They were given neither thrones nor destinies, for their existence threatened the balance of heaven and earth. Their only roles were destruction, chaos, and distortion. God concealed them because the weight of their knowledge was too great for mankind. To name them gave them presence in memory. To worship them invited corruption into nations. Unlike angels, they bore no message, no holy assignment. Unlike demons, they did not rebel nor tempt. They existed apart, embodying forces beyond the control of heaven or hell. This separation made them more dangerous than either. They could not be bound by spiritual laws nor cast out by divine authority. They were wild storms, scars of creation that refused to heal. Yet fragments of their existence bled into human culture. Dragons, leviathans, giants, serpents, and shadow spirits are echoes of these 12. Different names, different tales, but one terrifying source. The 12 became warnings carved into the memory of mankind. Prophets hinted at them in riddles, poets cloaked them in metaphors, nations feared their return. Silence was the only shield against their influence. What separated them from angels and demons was not just power, but purpose. Angels serve in light, demons corrupt in darkness, but these beings held no loyalty, no ambition. They were chaos embodied, existing only by nature. If angels symbolize order and demons rebellion, these were distortion itself. They reminded creation of its boundaries and what happens when those boundaries break. Their existence testified to the cost of imbalance. The flood silenced some, but not all. Chains of judgment bound others, yet whispers claim remnants linger in the earth's deep places. If even one stirred again, the world would tremble beneath its weight. Why would God allow them at all? Perhaps as lessons reminders that creation is vast and dangerous when harmony is broken. Perhaps as warnings that not all mysteries were meant to be solved. Their memory teaches that some battles are fought not with swords, but with silence. Forgetting was the greatest weapon against them. To dwell too long on their story was to invite their shadow. And yet humanity cannot resist. Our myths, our nightmares, our legends all betray remembrance. In forgetting, we still remember. In silence, we still whisper. The 12 creatures of terror stand as scars of creation, erased yet alive in memory. They prove the most frightening beings are not angels with fire or demons with horns. Sometimes true terror is what refuses to be named. The 12 creatures are warnings etched in silence, shadows waiting beyond memory's edge. Their story is a reminder that some truths are more terrifying than lies. The War of Silence was unlike any other conflict, for it was not fought with swords or armies, but with restraint, secrecy, and erased memory. God himself decreed that the most terrifying creatures of creation should never be spoken of. Prophets who received glimpses of them were warned to cover their words in poetry and riddles, lest the people be consumed by fear. This command was not a punishment for the prophets, but a mercy for the nations. To speak plainly of these beings was to give them form in human thought, and thought alone could awaken terror that spread like fire. Silence became the shield, a weapon forged in obedience. God's instructions were precise. The names of the forbidden were not to be uttered. The scrolls that carried their descriptions were sealed, erased, or disguised. Only shadows of their existence remained, woven carefully into stories that seemed harmless to the untrained eye. The nations of the ancient world carried their own fear in secret. Some whispered of great beasts in their legends, others painted monstrous forms on cave walls, but never named them aloud. They knew instinctively that these creatures were not to be worshipped, yet they trembled at the thought of provoking them. The silence created an unspoken agreement between heaven and earth. Prophets would not speak openly, and the people would not pursue forbidden knowledge. This pact was meant to preserve peace of mind and protect faith from crumbling beneath horrors too vast to comprehend. Israel's poets became masters of coded warnings. They sang of the sea monster Leviathan, yet beneath the metaphor lay echoes of truths too dreadful to declare. The songs of David and the Proverbs of Solomon carried whispers wrapped in wisdom, disguised so the faithful would be guided without terror. When Isaiah spoke of chaos fleeing before God's throne, he was not only speaking of demons, but of creatures far older. When Job described the behemoth and the serpent of the deep, his words were layered with meanings understood only by those who had ears to hear. The message was hidden in plain sight. The silence did not mean denial. The creatures existed, and heaven knew it. But the people of earth were guarded from knowledge that could drive them into despair or worse, into temptation to seek out forbidden's power. For ancient nations, fear was a companion they could not escape. Farmers whispered before planting, sailors prayed before voyaging, and warriors carved symbols into their weapons, not against human enemies, but against forces they could not name. These rituals were echoes of memories they could never fully articulate. In darkened temples, priests sometimes hinted at the forbidden beings, speaking of eyes that watched from beyond the stars or shadows that swallowed armies. Yet even they cloaked their words in metaphor, for to speak plainly was considered a curse upon the tongue. The prophets of Israel bore the heaviest burden. They saw more than they could reveal, glimpses of creatures that dwarfed human understanding. Their obedience and silence became as crucial as their words of truth. The coded language they used was both a shield and a key. To the faithful, it was a reminder of God's sovereignty over all forces of creation. To the unfaithful, it seemed little more than poetic exaggeration, keeping them blind to what they could not bear. Even demons trembled at these creatures. Though fallen angels revel in rebellion, they recognized power greater than their own. To encounter one of these forbidden beings was to confront chaos that cared nothing for allegiance to heaven or hell. Demons thrive on corruption and control, but these creatures could not be controlled. They were storms, wild and unchained, existing outside the laws that bound angels and devils alike. Their presence was terror, even to those who delighted in fear. Why would God allow such beings to remain unseen, yet present? Perhaps to remind creation that ultimate control belongs to Him alone. No rebellion, no evil, no kingdom of man could claim supremacy in a universe holding mysteries only God could master. The silence became part of Israel's identity. Chosen not only to know truth, but to guard against dangerous knowledge, their songs, prayers, and prophecies carried warnings veiled enough to teach without tearing hope away. The war of silence was not fought on battlefields, but in hearts and minds. It demanded discipline, reverence, and trust that God knew what He was hiding. It required faith to believe that some truths were too costly to bear, and yet silence did not erase fear. The ancients knew something waited beyond their understanding. They built myths to explain it, rituals to appease it, and stories to pass dread from one generation to the next. The prophets, however, walked a finer line. They had seen what others only imagined, and the weight of that vision marked them forever. Their silence was not ignorance but obedience, born from encounters too dreadful to describe. Consider the trembling hand of a scribe who nearly wrote too much, only to blot out his words. Imagine the prophet who, after visions of abominations, wept through the night because he could not share the full truth with his people. Their restraint was its own kind of war. Even demons understood the silence. They too avoided naming these creatures, for they knew that even their own kind could be destroyed by them. To tempt a man was simple, but to awaken a forbidden being was to invite disaster. Thus, silence itself became a weapon of heaven. It guarded the people, restrained the curious, and held darkness at bay. The war of silence was not passive. It was active resistance against chaos, pressing at the edges of creation. What makes this war chilling is that it is still ongoing. The silence has not ended, and fragments of truth remain scattered, disguised as myth or dismissed as legend. The same restraint that guided prophets now challenges us today. Some may hunger to know, to uncover the hidden, to peel back the veil. But in that hunger lies danger. The silence of God is not neglect, it is protection, and to break it may be to summon what was never meant to rise again. Israel's coded songs remain as echoes of that truth. Poetic, mysterious, and layered with warnings, they remind us that silence can speak louder than words. They are hymns of victory that conceal unspeakable threats. The war of silence teaches that not every revelation is a blessing. Sometimes the greatest gift is not knowing, for ignorance is safety. Knowledge in this case is not power, it is peril, and so the silence endures. Prophets obeyed, nations feared, demons trembled, and God's people were preserved. The creatures remain locked in memory's shadows, unnamed yet not forgotten. The war of silence was not about erasing truth, but shielding humanity from it. As long as silence holds, mankind is spared from facing terrors that even the darkest spirits dread. The earth itself carries scars of what it once hid. Beneath layers of rock and soil, fossils emerge that do not fit tidy charts of science. Some are fragments too large, strange, and unnatural to belong to any known species. Paleontologists sometimes admit anomalies but quickly bury them under new classifications. Yet some fossils resemble the forbidden creatures whispered of in ancient records. Their silence echoes the war of concealment. Cryptids, creatures of folklore, haunt the edge of human imagination. From ocean depths to forest shadows, witnesses claim encounters with beings that should not exist. Though dismissed as legend, these stories carry frightening consistencies. Sightings of winged beasts with burning eyes, serpents as wide as rivers, and towering figures vanishing into the wilderness cannot all be inventions. They align closely with ancient descriptions. Are they myths reborn or remnants refusing to die? Some fishermen tell of monsters rising from beneath waves, dragging boats into the abyss. Hikers speak of shadows taller than trees moving silently across ridges. Farmers in remote lands recall livestock drained of life with no predator to blame. These accounts persist across cultures and centuries. The human mind may create stories, but it rarely creates the same story in every corner of the globe. Patterns reveal more than superstition. They whisper of enduring traces. Are these creatures truly gone or only locked away? Scripture suggests some were bound, chained in darkness until judgment. But chains do not always mean destruction. Imprisonment implies a possibility of release. The oceans are the most haunting possibility. Vast, unexplored, and largely unknown, they could conceal remnants of the forbiddens. Leviathan-like descriptions of massive serpents and monstrous fish surface even in modern times. If the earth was once purged by the flood, the deep may have become the prison for what could not be destroyed. Humanity walks on land thinking itself safe, while the seas hold secrets that could shatter that confidence in a moment. Forests and mountains tell similar tales. Remote ranges hide shadows defying explanation. Some hunters swear they saw creatures with eyes like burning coals, disappearing before bullets could land. The wilderness may guard more than wildlife. Cults and dark religions seem to know more than they should. In hidden chambers, they carve sigils and chant names, resembling echoes of the 12 forbidden beings. Their rituals are not drawn from thin air, but fragments of knowledge passed through the ages. These cults whisper that the creatures are not dead, but waiting. They believe blood, sacrifice, and devotion can awaken them from chains. To them, silence is not protection, but a barrier to be broken. What is terrifying is how these rituals align with ancient warnings. Some chants resemble fragments from Enoch's erased scrolls. Some names they invoke match words buried in ancient poetry, as though they have pieced together fragments God commanded remain hidden. These dark gatherings are not confined to the past. Even today, hidden groups across the world practice ceremonies calling upon beings never meant to return. Their persistence proves that silence is constantly under assault. The link between the forbidden creatures and end-time prophecy is chilling. Revelation speaks of beasts rising from sea and earth, horrors that captivate and terrify mankind. Could these visions be symbols or the re-emergence of what was hidden before the flood? The language of prophecy is rich with imagery, but sometimes imagery points to reality. The monstrous figures in apocalyptic visions may not simply be metaphors of power. They may be beings that once walked the earth and may walk again. When the world trembles under final judgment, what better way to reveal God's supremacy than to unleash terrors humanity long forgot? Creatures that even demons fear could rise not to rule, but to serve as instruments of wrath. If the end is a great unveiling, the hidden may be revealed. The silence that protected generations may break, and the world may confront horrors preserved in chains until the appointed time. This makes prophecy even more terrifying. Some scholars quietly suggest cryptid sightings are not random but warnings. Each encounter may be a tremor before the earthquake, a reminder that boundaries are thinning. The veil of silence may not hold forever. Human fascination with these beings in culture is itself suspicious. Movies, novels, and games fixate on monsters from the deep, shadowy giants and hybrid abominations. It is as if imagination is being prepared for something real. The persistence of these stories reveals a deep unease in the human spirit. Something within us remembers, even if history and science insist we forget. That memory manifests in fear, fascination, and endless retelling. The terrifying truth is that traces are everywhere in fossils, legends, sightings, and rituals. The forbidden is not far from our world. It lingers, waiting for the right moment. If these creatures rise again, humanity will confront a reality larger than angels and demons. They will see chaos embodied, creations that do not fit categories, and forces no army can resist. It is no accident that even demons tremble at their mention. Demons thrive in rebellion, but they recognize power that dwarfs their own. Should the forbiddens return, even hell itself will quake. The thought alone shakes faith, but prophecy gives it direction. These creatures are not returning at random, but at the appointed hour when God allows the final unveiling of his judgment. They are instruments of terror, yet also instruments of purpose. In this light, cryptids and unexplained sightings take on new weight. They may not just be curiosities of folklore, but glimpses of a darker truth struggling to break through. The past is closer to the present than we dare admit. The flood silenced them once, but the end may summon them again. When that day comes, silence will no longer protect. It will be broken by the roar of creatures hidden since creation's dawn. Until then, traces remain scattered like puzzle pieces across the earth. Fossils, myths, sightings, and rituals hint at a reality that refuses to die. Those who listen closely can hear the whisper of chains straining in the dark. The world may laugh at legends, but legends outlive laughter. They cling to human memory because they are more than fantasy. They are warnings disguised as stories, signals of what waits to rise again. Traces of the forbidden remind us that the line between past and future is thin. What was once hidden can return, and when it does, mankind will face terrors not born of imagination, but of history's deepest shadows. Some truths are too heavy for human hearts to bear. Certain pages of history have been torn away, leaving only faint whispers of what once walked among creation. Behind the silence of Scripture lies a mystery that has terrified prophets and confounded scholars. God in his sovereignty veiled the existence of beings so dreadful that even demons recoil at their memory. It was not to keep his people ignorant, but because some knowledge burns like fire when touched by mortal hands. The danger was never in the names themselves, but in what would awaken if they were pursued. These creatures, neither angel nor demon, were reminders of creation's fragile boundaries. Not every being God spoke into existence was meant to dwell alongside man. Some carried the stain of rebellion, others the weight of chaos, all reflecting the consequences of disobedience in ways too dreadful for men to behold. When prophets glimpsed them, they fell silent. Their visions blurred into symbols and riddles because to speak plainly would unravel sanity. To call these creatures by their true form was to invite terror, so even holy men hid their language in songs, parables, and broken lines. The danger of knowing too much was not simply fear, it was obsession. To gaze too long at forbidden mysteries was to hunger for the power they concealed. Nations that sought them in the past did not rise in wisdom, but collapsed in bloodshed, swallowed by the very darkness they craved. God's holiness demanded that such beings be hidden. His judgment had already fallen upon them, but the memory of their existence lingered as a lesson. Creation is not ours to master, and crossing divine boundaries leads only to ruin. The concealment was mercy. Imagine a world where men used their names as weapons, where kings summoned them in battle, where temples rose not to God, but to these forbidden terrors. Humanity would have annihilated itself long before the first covenant was written. And yet God left traces, not to provoke worship, but to remind. Fossils buried in stone, shadows in myth, fragments in lost scriptures, all were whispers of what was sealed away. Their silence is God's shield, their memory God's lesson. For what they teach is not about themselves, but about Him. They testify to His authority as Creator, His power to judge, and His mercy to protect. Even the most horrifying chaos cannot escape His rule. That which terrifies man trembles before His throne. Questions linger in the minds of the bold. Could they return in the final days? Would the tearing open of heaven's seals unleash not only angels and demons, but these hidden terrors? The prophecies of Revelation leave space for shadows greater than we can imagine. When the abyss is opened, smoke rises, and creatures crawl forth unlike any seen on earth. Are they demons only, or do echoes of these forbidden ones return with them? The thought alone makes the heart shudder, for what was locked away once may not remain so forever. The end times are not just judgment on humanity, but a full reckoning of creation itself. Everything that defied God's order will be confronted. Every hidden thing will be dragged into light, including beings once erased from memory. Perhaps that is why we are warned not to seek them. To pursue their knowledge is to call out to what should remain silent. But to remember their lesson is to anchor ourselves in God's holiness, realizing the danger of stepping outside His boundaries. The final suspense remains in a whisper older than Scripture. Among the 12 creatures once concealed, one's name is forbidden even in myth. It embodies the sum of all chaos, the shadow of rebellion itself. Prophets saw it, but their tongues froze. Nations carved signs of it, but the stones were broken. Even demons never speak of it, for its presence terrifies more than judgment itself. It is a creature too dreadful for memory, too dangerous for language. God Himself sealed it away with silence. Perhaps in His wisdom, He spared us from the unbearable weight of imagining it. But as the days grow darker and prophecy unfolds, one cannot help but wonder, will even that final silence be broken? And if it is, will mankind be ready for what steps from the shadows? Or will we finally understand why God hid them, and why some truths are forbidden? The answer may be nearer than we dare believe. Before we embark on this captivating journey, we would love your support. Hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel. Share this video with others, and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest stories.